market research essentially connects your customers to your product, or connects the company, more accurately to say, it connects your company to your potential market via knowledge, and the knowledge is at your customers.
Welcome to The Mountain Pass, a podcast about lifelong learning, curiosity, and our wonderful brain. Topics we love at Alp Audio. But this isn't a podcast about Alp, the product. Rather, it's conversations driven by our curiosity. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Maria Blekher. Dr. Blekher is the founding director of the Innovation Lab and a clinical associate professor at the Syms School of Business at Yeshiva University in New York. I wanted to interview Maria because the topic she teaches, which is an innovation lab of applied market research, are topics that are exactly at the intersection of practical and theoretical knowledge. Teaching students at universities these skills and the challenge of teaching theoretical knowledge in a way that can be applied is something that I'm incredibly interested in, if you haven't noticed that already. And her experience can shed a fresh perspective on what works and what doesn't. From here to there, we discussed why market research is so important, but really easy to get wrong, and the difference between Israeli and American university students. Enjoy. Maria, welcome to the Mountain Pass. It's great to have you here. And I just wanted to start off with some background on yourself, how you entered teaching and made your way from Israel to New York City, why you teach, and why specifically marketing.
Absolutely. So thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. So my teaching career actually started right as I joined my PhD program. So I started a PhD back in 2000 and I want to say 9, and that's when I started teaching. And marketing was a natural fit because my PhD is in marketing consumer behavior. So I got the opportunity to actually teach what I was researching and what I was practicing until that moment. And, I took this opportunity with two hands, and I started teaching in Ben Gurion University back in Israel and in Sapir College. And that was the beginning of my teaching career.
What's the connection, I guess, between a PhD student and teaching? I have friends who are doing doctorates, and often they take the teaching job because I'll say it's convenient. It's on campus. It's in a topic that they have. But what do you think? Do you think it's a good connection, or do you just think it's a marriage of convenience?
Well, I can only speak for myself. For me, it was a great connection. One of the things that I was doing before PhD and in parallel with my PhD is I always had a job in the real world. So I always had my one foot in the business and the other in academia. And I think that the ability to bring those, this entire concept into the classroom played out really well. On top of that, I enjoy teaching. I really think that it's, beyond what we know. It's how can we pass this knowledge to other people and future generations. And so for me, it's part of my mission. It's about, on top of everything I do, how to pass this knowledge on. And, in a college setting, in a university, you pass this knowledge on by teaching. So it worked for me in a perfect manner. Of course, it was convenient, but it goes beyond convenience because there are much easier jobs than teaching.
True. I go back to my first degree, and I think one of the best teachers we had in my degree was a doctorate student who was doing his PhD, and he was teaching one of the courses. And the fact that it wasn't so long ago that he had been in our shoes that made him a good teacher, because he really sympathized with us, and he didn't have beginner's eyes, but he empathized much more than the professors who had been teaching for literally 30 years.
I totally get it. When I started teaching, I had students who were older than I was back in the days. So it was an interesting experience. And I was in similar age to the other students. But again, I don't think that age plays a major factor, but the fact that, I was still, partially in school, maybe played a role. Yeah, absolutely. And plus, you start teaching, you're very motivated. You're doing that because you want to do that. You're passionate about it. It's not a default option to start being a professor. So I think there is a lot of conscious choice here, and that can also contribute to the entire teaching process.
Right. It's interesting. The last podcast we had was about instructional design, and there we were talking for 45 minutes about how to create a course, how to design a course, and sometimes just being passionate about a subject and being able to empathize with the students goes 80% of the way. It's amazing.
I think that's a very good note. So I think it can go 80%. You will still need the 20% of the instructional design to make it, I would say, almost perfect, to add the structure. But yeah, passion about teaching, passion about the topic that you're teaching, and really being connected to what is going on in the industry and in the real business can take you a long way. When you add some format and processes into that, I think that's when you're ending up having a very solid and well put together course that is appealing to students, and that's what you eventually end up with, providing meaningful learning experience to your students, which is that's the goal essentially.
Right. And so you made your way from Ben-Gurion University in Sapir to Yeshiva University in New York, and now you are a clinical associate at the Syms School of Business. And was part of that process going through the teaching how to teach? Was that not part of it? Was that any part of it?
That's an interesting question. So I've been teaching in Israel for, I was doing my PhD for 4 years, and I was teaching for 4 years, and I was teaching a lot. I took on any teaching opportunity that showed itself, and so I had a pretty serious teaching experience by the time I arrived to the US. And again, in Israel, I was teaching undergrads, I was teaching MBAs, I was teaching master level students, and so bringing that experience here to YU, it was very helpful. And then at YU, one of the positions I took after joining the university is I was the director of a master's program in digital marketing and media. And the program was brand new, and it was fully online way before everyone transferred onto Zoom. And so that's when I was introduced to the concept of instructional design and how you actually structure a course in a formal level. And I have to say that not completely changed the way I see teaching and course design, but I think it helped me to complete this puzzle of how you become a good professor and how do you teach in a more structured and process-oriented way. So I think those two parts kind of complemented each other for me.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have, or people who teach usually teach because they have some passion for it, they have some sense for it, and then the instructional design part really helps you fine-tune the rough edges, or especially when the teaching environment becomes more complicated. Online, offline, like hybrid, or you're teaching large classes or complicated subjects, because that's when you really need to be aware of the intricacies, I think.
Absolutely. I think instructional design provides you guidelines and structure. And again, just like you said, when you have larger classes or when things become hybrid, having a structure or at least a roadmap is very, very helpful. It helps the professors and it helps the students so they know what is following. And it might be not as intuitive, but when you learn the process, it suddenly makes a lot of sense. And again, I would say that structure on its own will not provide a good teaching and learning experience. But when you have a passionate professor or an expert for that sake, and you provide the structure and the roadmap, those two combined really can create a great experience for both the professor and the students.
So this one might be completely off topic and you can pass if you want. But the differences between teaching at Israeli institutions versus an American institution, or the students. I grew up in Israel, but my parents are from New York. So I speak English, but I've grown up in Israel my entire life. And I'm just wondering what the differences are, kind of in very broad strokes.
Oh, that's a good question and a funny one. Well, I would say the first difference is the age of the students. In Israel, students go to college, later age. So, you have undergraduate students who can be 24 or 25 or 27. And that's when I started teaching in Israel and I was teaching in a graduate level program, I had students who were older than I was, or I have undergraduate students who were my age at a time. Here in the US, most of the students are significantly younger. Now it shows, as in everything, the experience you have till the point you get to college, the maturity, and it plays, though I have to say that my students at YU are very mature and they're great and insightful and entrepreneurial, but these are two very different populations.
Right.
On a more anecdotal level, in the States, you're approached as a professor, right? Like I'm Professor Blekher. And in Israel, it goes on first name basis. I was like Maria. And it's a very anecdotal, but that's a key difference. I think also the approach in Israel is much less structured. And, we're Israelis and I'm Israeli. So you can question a lot and you can question your professor and you can argue, and that's perfectly fine because, that's the cultural setting in the US, I think, and it goes from the school system. And, I see it with my children, the way they approach their teachers. There is, more structure, maybe slightly more distance, which is fine. I think, both systems work well, because they're embedded in the culture, right? You cannot take, a system and take it outside of context. In the Israeli context, the first name basis work perfectly fine. In the American context, you have kindergarten teacher who is approached as Miss something. It makes sense that when you're in college, you'll call your professor like professor and her last name. So I think it's depending on the context. Both populations are great. Both American and Israeli students are amazing. And I think today, even more than ever, we can see the blend. We can see more American students taking courses in Israel. We can see more Israeli students taking classes here in the US. So I think this is, kind of the development, and COVID actually helped to accelerate that, because everything is online and on Zoom. So Israeli students can attend classes here in the US and be admitted into American universities, and they don't need to be physically here, and same goes the other way.
Interesting. I mean, I completely relate to the anecdotes. I mean, Israel is very informal in that sense, for good and for bad. But I think I'm just the age difference, which I'm going to use as a segue into something that I've been reflecting on about one of the challenges that I experienced in my university degree, and I think universities are dealing with better these days, is just one of the things that makes learning stick is when it's relevant for the student. And one of the advantages, I went to university when I was also 25, 26, 27, we were learning things that I was also working in parallel. And so some of the classes actually related, and I paid a lot of attention to those. And some of the classes did not relate at all, and I completely coasted through those until maybe 3 or 4 years later, all of a sudden it hit me and I was like, oh, we did learn Porter's, 5 forces model, and it's a shame that I don't remember it at all. So I'm wondering about that, also with the younger population, but also just in general, because I know that part of what you teach is a lab. It's not a purely academic class.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So I think when you go to college at a later stage in life, or when you're older and when you have some experience working in the industry or in the business, you approach material differently, and you learn differently, and you process differently, and you apply differently. So I can totally relate to you being interested in some courses more than others. That's what I did when I had my MBA. There were some courses that were super relevant to what I was doing at the time, and there were some courses that were significantly less relevant, and so I was less passionate student in those courses. And I think it's same thing can happen. It still happens, and overall, our job as professors is to make the material relatable and relevant and interesting to students. And I'm speaking now about the business school classes. So, when you're teaching physics, it's physics. Math is math. When we speak about business and specifically about marketing, marketing is something that is happening every day, everywhere. We're exposed to it. You cannot ignore it. So I think for subjects like marketing or marketing research or innovation or entrepreneurship, you really want to make this connection between the industry and the real life and the real student experience and the theory. I think that's where magic happens. And you mentioned the lab, which is essentially a place where we provide students with real life experience working with Israeli and other local and international entrepreneurs. And that's exactly the essence. It's teaching the theory in the classroom and then going out into the real life and testing it and see how it works. And sometimes it works perfectly, but sometimes you see that, whatever was written in the textbook or the model that the professor was teaching us yesterday, when we're trying to apply it to the startup, it doesn't work. And then it challenges the student's mind. So it doesn't work. What can we do to make it work? Maybe we should use a different model, or maybe we should use only part of that model, or maybe we should take a different approach. So I think this is the kind of learning that enhances both the theoretical understanding, because theory is important. We should understand why things the way they are, like the science behind what we're doing. But then real life is important because that's where you can experiment the theory. And when it comes to business and marketing, unless we can experiment with the theories and the models, in my opinion, their value is their implementation. So I think that's where those two play out together.
So the innovation lab is students get paired with startups, and then the startup uses them. Is it an internship, or is it more of a joint work on a program?
So it's not an internship, though we do run internship programs, more internship-oriented programs during the summer. In fact, the startups are embedded into our course curriculum. So students who enroll in certain courses know they will be working with startups from the Innovation Lab as part of their course curriculum. That's their course project. So it's not an extra they're doing, but they're learning. Let's say I'm teaching applied research. In my applied research course, my students will, on top of all their projects and case studies, will be running a real research for a startup. So I will be teaching them how to create a questionnaire, and then they will create a questionnaire for a startup, and they will have to implement the knowledge and how you put together questions and what skills you should be using. And they will be testing it, and then they will be looking at the outcomes and the results. They will be collecting the data. They will be analyzing that. And that experience hopefully will end up being meaningful and hands-on for them. So 2 years from now, if they will have to review a research that would be presented to them because they will be marketing managers for a startup, they will be critical thinkers because they will remember how you run a research. And when they will be looking at the questions and on the scales, they will see that the scale is skewed or that the question is biased. So it's not necessarily that everybody after any of the courses, they have to be marketers or they have to run research for their careers. but even the ability to look at something and to use the knowledge and the experience you have to ask the right questions can take you a long way in real life, in your future career.
And you're the founder of the Innovation Lab, right?
I'm the founding director of the Innovation Lab, yes.
And so I think it's amazing, because I think things like this is exactly what I felt I was missing in my BA and in my MBA. And it was exactly that, the meeting place, the juxtaposition between frameworks and putting it into practice, and also not only putting it into practice, but seeing what, a CEO or a marketing manager thinks of it. Like, what's the expression on their face when you come to them and say, here's the marketing mix, have you considered it? And sometimes they'll, an expression can say 1,000 words. And that meeting place is really, for me, it was missing. So I'm really happy to see you implement it. And I'm wondering, A, what made you think about it? And B, what was the pitch process to Yeshiva University to get them bought in?
Well, to be honest, the Innovation Lab was on university agenda for a while.
Perfect timing.
It was a perfect timing because the university had this idea of creating a place where Israeli startups can come in and work with our students. When I joined and I took the leadership over the project, I've put together the entire program and the entire the entire organizational and content structure underneath it. And we essentially designed the lab, instead of being an internship program, as something that will be embedded into YU curriculum. And then we went out and recruited Israeli startups. So the idea was really to see how we better serve our key two stakeholders, our students, and the Israeli and other international and local startups, and how we maximize on the resources we have to make a bigger impact and to really bridge this ocean, or the gap between the Israeli market and the New York tech ecosystem. That was the original idea. Now we're expanding. We're working with international startups. We're working with local New York-based businesses and startups. But the initial idea was really creating this bridge between Israel and the U.S. market.
Got it. So taking us back to the teaching conversation, at ALP we just finished your applied market research course, and honestly, it was more challenging than we anticipated, because a lot of market research, or at least I'll speak for myself, this was something that we do a lot of market research as a startup all the time, and it's not always thorough and it's not always by the book, but it is something that we're really doing constantly every week. We have user surveys and data points embedded in the product, to conducting interviews with users every single week, and market research on broader trends. And so when I approached the course, I thought, okay, this is something most of us know how to do, and it'll be okay. And then as we got into it, it turned out to be more nuanced than I had thought. And also the gap between doing it kind of on the fly, seat of your pants, and doing it properly is a gap that I think, until you encounter it yourself and in the material, is something that you don't appreciate. So I wanted to get your thoughts, A, on how you teach applied market research, why you think it's important for entrepreneurs, for students to know, and kind of just at a high level what it is.
That's a great point. I think you just nailed it. There is a major difference between running a research on the go, and this is the fact that you're doing it is amazing, because this is the step that very often is being overlooked by startups and founders. So the fact that you're running surveys and you're doing interviews, it is by itself, it speaks a lot about the way you're running your company, and that's and that can sometimes be the differentiator between success and failure, because market research essentially connects your customers to your product, or connects the company, more accurately to say, it connects your company to your potential market via knowledge, and the knowledge is at your customers. So on my end, when you say, why do you need market research? Well, if you have a company, or if you have an idea, you have to understand your target market. Without that, there is nothing there for you to do. And so one of the probably biggest mistakes companies and startups are doing is they are designing or developing this amazing product which has the best features, and then they approach the market and say, well, we designed this beautiful thing for you. Do you want to buy it? And the market says, well, it's beautiful, but no, I don't need it. It doesn't serve my needs. It doesn't solve any pain for me. And there is a lot of other options. And so my answer is no. And market research, when properly done and designed, and when done consistently, can help founders and business owners and companies to bridge this knowledge gap and understand what are the needs in the market. So in the process of designing the product, they add the features that are actually needed, or they design a product that actually solves a real problem, rather than designing the best technology or the best looking app out there. So marketing research, it's a key feature because it helps you to bridge the information gap. And information is key to understanding your customers, and they have the knowledge and the information. So, and marketing research, we can call it marketing research, customer discovery, problem validation. It doesn't matter how we will call it. It is the process of collecting data from your end users or potential market or actual consumers or target market or competitors, for the sake of a larger discussion. So from where I stand, it's essential. Whether if you're planning to be an entrepreneur, you have to understand it. If you want to work in marketing in the future, you need to understand it. Even if you want to be an engineer or psychologist or a teacher, you need to understand at least the idea of it, because it's just this connection between your students or your market to what you're doing. That's for me on a very large scale.
Right. I think just one of the bigger trends that we're seeing now in almost any space, especially in teaching, by the way, is how courses or anything you do, whether it's a product, it's teaching, it's selling something, these are all iterative processes. And the loop between iterations is getting shorter and shorter. And so that, I really like the way you just defined it in the beginning, which was market research is connecting your target market to your company through knowledge. And that knowledge is what helps you improve each iteration. And so whether you're teaching and you're getting, mid-semester feedbacks, or you have an app and you're getting app reviews or feedback, throughout the product, those cycles are getting shorter. And what really struck me in the material that in your course was that it's very easy to think that you're doing it properly and actually get it completely wrong by ignoring some simple things like biases, the way you word a questionnaire, who you're asking, and you feel like you're doing everything right, but you're getting it wrong. And it's really on a knife's edge. And I don't think there are many things that we do in the entrepreneurial world or even in the teaching world where you're right, but you're wrong.
100%. I have to agree with you. I think that when we're collecting student reviews, when we're collecting app reviews, when we're ranking restaurants on Yelp, that's all part of research, and it's very easy to do it wrong. Sometimes it's even easier, right? Because it's enough that you have a scale that is skewed, and you'll get great reviews. I used to have, and I unfortunately don't have it now. When I was teaching back in Israel, I had a physical survey. One of the ones that you would get in a restaurant was for an Italian restaurant chain in Israel, and they had a scale of how happy you are with the food and the service. and the scale was 1 to 4, and it was okay, good, very good, excellent. This was the scale, and it was the perfect example where all the answers were positive. And essentially, you cannot go wrong.
Knowing Israeli customer service, that's impossible. There was no very bad.
There was no, but it was 4-item scale starting with okay. So let's say, and I would ask my students then, what do you think about this survey? And by then they would say, well, the scale is missing items and it's biased, it's skewed, it doesn't provide the entire range of answers. And I say, yeah, but someone designed it. So if your job now or your goal is to demonstrate that the restaurant is doing great because you're a franchise and you want, to demonstrate positive feedback, you can do that. But if you want to collect an honest feedback and to improve the food or the service or the waiting time, you need to ask the right questions. You should provide the proper options to answer, and you should follow through. And these are very easy to miss. Again, just using the right wording in questions or using specific words that will nudge people towards a specific answer is something that can be easily done. And there are plenty of examples of these questions online. So yeah, I think this course specifically is, at least for me, is to really understand the idea behind marketing research, because there are so many ways today to collect data. You don't necessarily have to run questionnaires or surveys. You can track data. There are so many things you can do. But to understand the reasoning behind it, and at least the concept of how to run it properly, can help you then to navigate the more complex world of market research when you really face the reality, and the reality doesn't follow the book. But if you understand the theory, it will make it easier for you to apply then and adjust. That's the way I see it.
Do you think the startups that you work with treat market research seriously enough, or is it something that as a founder, you're always putting out fires, and so there is an element of just keeping your head above water, and we don't have resources to do proper in-depth, I can't get 15 people in a room to do a classic kind of user group analysis type, but there are lots of things we do, but the kind of proper research is something that's it always feels a little bit too far away, too hard. We don't like the resources. So is there a lot of pushback that you get, or do you think people are taking it seriously, or is that a fight that you have on your plate?
I think that today the understanding that if you want to be successful and if you want to design a product or a service or an app that users will use and then will be willing to pay for, you have to speak to them. I think kind of sank through, and entrepreneurs understand that. And it doesn't mean that you now need to go and run a very, very proper market research, but it does mean that you need to speak to your customers, even if it's 10. Even if the sample is not a perfect sample, it's better than not doing that at all. Of course, in an ideal world, we would all be running an ongoing market research with a proper sampling, proper analysis, proper representation, and everything would be perfect. But that's exactly when reality meets theory, and what works in theory doesn't always work in reality, because we have constraints and we have limited resources, and we need to allocate them. But I think that today many more entrepreneurs are spending time in speaking to people, in understanding the needs of the market, and speaking to potential customers, because without that, you'll develop this perfect product that no one needs.
So what are the kind of the go-to resources that you send your students or the entrepreneurs in the lab to, beyond the course, beyond taking your course? Like, are there any books, podcasts?
So that's a great question. In fact, there is a great book it calls The Right It. I would strongly recommend it to aspiring entrepreneurs who are currently in business. Again, I think it provides an interesting introspective on how to run a research, why you should run a research, and it's very practical. So it's not all theory. It's why should you do that? Why do you need the right sample? Why do you need to actually open a landing page and start collecting emails before developing the entire website? And how to validate your idea. And I think this is one of the most important stages, at least for entrepreneurs. You need to validate your idea. And so The Right It, I think that's a good starting point.
Fantastic. For me, it's the mom test, which is a great.
And the mom test is an amazing book as well.
Yeah. Just really basic how to word your user interviews, which I found completely priceless. Highly recommended. Great. So I will put links to both of those in the podcast notes. And if people want to follow you, find you online, I know you're pretty prolific and popular on LinkedIn, but anywhere else?
Yeah. I would say at this point, LinkedIn would be probably the best platform to follow me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Mountain Pass.
Thank you for having me here. It was great.
My pleasure.